I never thought that a family dinner would end with my brother gasping for breath, and a woman I'd just met staring at me like I was her next victim. I'd survived cancer at 60, rebuilt after a house fire at 67, and buried my husband of 50 years without falling to pieces. But nothing prepared me for what I saw that night. The betrayal was slick, sweet-smelling, and baked into a goddamn casserole. It was Denver in March, still cold enough that you wore a coat, but not cold enough to die, or so I thought. My brother John had invited a woman named Victoria to Sunday dinner. He introduced her as an old friend from his teaching days, someone he'd recently reconnected with. She was beautiful in that hard, sculpted way older women can be when they're trying to look younger. Tight smile, too perfect hair, eyes that scan the room like a predator checking for weakness. She brought the casserole. "It's my specialty," she said, laying it gently on the table like it was the crown roast of the evening. John always loved it back when we worked together. I didn't like her, not just in the way you don't like someone, for wearing too much perfume or for interrupting stories that aren't theirs to finish. No, this was deeper. A quiet gnawing in my gut. My instincts don't shout. They tap, steady and relentless, like a faucet that won't quite shut off. We sat. Plates were passed. Laughter rang off the walls, loud, hollow. My granddaughter Sophie, 12 years old and too trusting, reached for a serving spoon. That's when I saw it. Victoria glanced at Sophie. Not warm, not fond. It was a flicker, a flash of calculation so quick and cold it burned. And then, just as fast, she smiled again. But I'd seen it. My hand shook slightly as I reached for a napkin. I wrote 2 words with the corner of my fork, poking the paper through. Act sick. Then I folded it and slipped it beside Sophie's plate like it was nothing. She looked at me, confused, but I didn't blink. "Excuse me," Sophie said a few minutes later, pushing back her chair. "I don't feel well." Victoria watched her leave with too much interest. And then it happened. John coughed once. Then again, harder. His hand reached up like he could catch the pain before it hit, and then he collapsed face first into his dinner. China cracked. Screams followed. And Victoria? She didn't move, not at first. Her face drained, yes. But her eyes didn't go to John. They went straight to me. The paramedics hadn't even arrived yet, and I already knew what had happened. Or at least, I knew enough. John lay sprawled across the table, face pale, lips tinged blue. My niece was screaming. My nephew fumbled with his phone, hands shaking too hard to dial. But I sat still, like stone. My hands folded neatly in my lap. My eyes never left Victoria. She was good. I'll give her that. She stood, hands fluttering, voice high and trembling. "Oh my God, is he allergic to something? Is anyone a doctor?" She looked around the room like a scared guest at a car crash. But I wasn't fooled. Not for 1 second. Because I've seen what people look like when they're panicked. And I've seen what people look like when their plan doesn't go quite right. Victoria's face was all performance. Perfectly timed gasps, just enough distress to look innocent. But her eyes were darting, calculating, watching me too closely. My name is Helen Price. I'm 72, and I've had this gut feeling, this internal alarm, for as long as I can remember. It's saved me more times than I care to admit. When I was 9, I yanked my little sister back from the curb a second before a car jumped it. When I was 30, I knew the lump in my breast wasn't just a cyst before the biopsy ever came back. And when my husband's best friend tried to borrow 20 grand with a smile and a sob story, I knew he was lying the moment he walked through the door. People always say I'm paranoid, but I've learned the hard way. People hide the worst parts of themselves behind smiles. I never ignore my gut. That night, it was screaming louder than the sirens that were just now approaching. I glanced toward the kitchen, half to check the door, half to think. Victoria saw the movement. Her lips pressed together. That was her first mistake. She thought I was the kind of old woman who plays nice. She thought my age meant I'd be slow, soft, outmatched. She hadn't done her homework. The moment John fell, the moment Sophie left untouched food on her plate, and the moment Victoria's face didn't crumple in confusion, but shifted into tight panic. I knew. Not suspicion, certainty. She had brought that casserole to do harm. I didn't know how. Not yet, but I was going to find out. And she was going to regret ever thinking Helen Price was just some grandmother. Her hands fluttered. Her eyes didn't. They locked on me. Not on John, who was now wheezing, clawing at the air like it had turned to smoke around him. Not on Caroline, who was sobbing and trying to roll him onto his side. Not on Tyler, who was frantically calling 911. On me, like I was the problem, like she knew I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. And in that moment, the whole illusion cracked. Her concern was too polished, her voice too controlled, her hysteria too practiced. "I don't understand," she cried. "He was fine. What happened?" But there wasn't a single line of confusion on her face. I stood slowly, walked behind my brother, pressed 2 fingers to his neck, still had a pulse, but it was thready, fading. I looked over my shoulder and met her eyes full on for the first time. "You didn't eat anything," I said quietly, just for her. She blinked. "What?" she asked, wide-eyed. "The casserole," I said, calm as a lake in winter. "You served it, pushed it on everyone. But you never took a bite. Everyone else was too distracted to hear. But she did. Her lips parted like she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. She hadn't expected me to notice that. And she sure as hell hadn't expected me to say it out loud." Victoria slowly backed away from the table, one hand on her chest, like she might faint too. But I wasn't watching John anymore. I was watching her. Because the poison had already been served. But the real game was just beginning. When the house emptied and the last engine hum faded down the street, silence settled like dust after an explosion. I stood alone in my brother's kitchen, the same room we'd grown up making messes in, fighting over pie slices and licking spoons, now tainted by something far darker. I started cleaning for appearance's sake. Stacked plates, wiped counters. But what I was really doing was searching. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I've learned something over the years. Evil leaves breadcrumbs. Not always obvious ones, but if you slow down and listen, they're there. I opened the trash can. Paper towels, chicken bones, crumpled foil. And then, buried under a wad of damp napkins and a half-eaten dinner roll, I saw it. A tiny glass vial. Clear, empty, maybe the size of my thumb. The label was half peeled, but I saw the word clearly enough. Digitalis. My breath hitched. That wasn't seasoning. That wasn't allergy-related. That was poison. I picked it up with the corner of a napkin, hands suddenly cold. I didn't need to guess. I knew. My late husband Richard had been a pharmacist for 42 years. He used to keep a poison reference chart pinned above his workbench in the basement. I'd seen the name before. Digitalis. Derived from foxglove. Used to regulate heart conditions in the right dose. But in the wrong hands? It can stop a man's heart faster than fear itself. John didn't have a heart condition. Not a serious one anyway. No medications. No reason he should have reacted like that, unless someone gave him a reason. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the vial, resting in a plastic sandwich bag I'd found in the drawer. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I wasn't going to the police yet. Not without more. Victoria was smart. Slippery. A charge without proof would bounce right off her polished little self. But this? This was a start. The poison, the untouched plate, the calculation in her eyes. I looked around the kitchen, the place where I'd fed Sophie mac and cheese just weeks ago, where John and I had argued about politics and laughed about old girlfriends. She tried to turn it into a crime scene, but now it was going to be her undoing. Because you don't walk into a woman's family, poison her brother, and leave your fingerprints in the trash, not without consequences. And not with me watching. The next morning, I pulled the box from the hall closet, the one labeled Richard's shop, untouched since the week we buried him. It still smelled faintly of oil and printer ink. He used to fix watches, in our basement on weekends after he retired from the pharmacy. Tinkering, he called it. But really, he just liked being useful. Inside the box, tucked between rubber gloves and a magnifying visor, was a name I hadn't spoken in years, Dr. Franklin Meyer. A card, faded but legible. Clinical pharmacology, retired, it read. Richard's old co-worker. The two of them used to trade stories over beer about patients who thought essential oils could cure heart disease. Franklin had a quiet, brilliant mind and the patience of a saint. I called him. Franklin, it's Helen. Helen Price. Richard's widow. A pause. Then his voice, low and kind. Helen. Good Lord, it's been, 6 years? 7, I said. I need a favor. Franklin met me on his back porch, still in his robe, slippers worn to the sole. He offered me tea and didn't ask questions right away. Just watched as I handed over the vial, carefully sealed inside a second plastic bag. His eyes narrowed the moment he read the label. Where did you find this? In my brother's kitchen trash, I said, keeping my voice even. After he collapsed at dinner, Franklin opened a small black case from beneath the porch table. A field kit, complete with glass slides and dropper bottles. You always had good instincts, he murmured. He dabbed at the rim, tested the residue, and waited. 5 minutes later, he didn't look surprised when the test strip turned dark red. Digitalis, he confirmed. Potent, undiluted. You give this to a healthy man in his 70s, it's enough to stop the heart if the dose is high enough. I swallowed hard. Can they trace it? Only if the hospital runs a specific tox screen. It won't show up on a basic panel unless they're looking for it. I looked at him. Should I tell them? Not yet, he said gently. Not until you're ready to tell them everything. I nodded slowly, because now I wasn't guessing. I knew. Victoria had tried to kill my brother, and if Sophie had eaten what she wanted to, she might have been next. I thanked Franklin, tucked the vial back in my purse, and stood. Because the next step was inviting the killer into my own home. I called her the next day, calm, cheerful, like nothing was wrong. Victoria, I said, my voice light. Thank you for helping clean up the other night. Things have been so hectic with John in the hospital. I thought maybe you'd like to stop by for tea. There was a pause, barely a second. Then she answered too quickly. Oh, Helen, of course. I've been so worried I'd love to. Of course she would. She thought the storm had passed. That she'd cried enough crocodile tears to blend back into the wallpaper. She didn't know I was already building the noose. She arrived 20 minutes early. That was her first mistake, trying to catch me off guard. I greeted her at the door with a warm smile, ushered her into my little blue living room. Everything smelled like lemon polish and cinnamon. Inviting, ordinary, forgettable, just how I wanted it. Chamomile or mint? I asked, holding up 2 tins. Whatever you're having, she said sweetly. I chose mint. In the kitchen, I made 2 cups. I set hers down gently, placing the saucer just slightly to the left, so I'd remember which was which. Not that I'd done anything to it, but I wanted her to wonder. We sat, talked about John, about hospitals and stress and how fragile men become with age. She laughed too loudly, too long. Her eyes flicked toward the cup. I waited. Then I smiled and said it. Quiet, casual, deadly. Strange, isn't it? I murmured, stirring my tea. How quickly the strong can fall ill. Her spoon stopped mid-stir. I'm sorry, she said. John, I said, meeting her gaze. Never had heart issues. Never even a murmur. Yet 1 bite of dinner, and down he goes. Curious. She swallowed. Her cup stayed on the saucer. Food poisoning? She offered. An allergic reaction, maybe? You never know. I leaned forward slightly. Of course. But you didn't eat the casserole, did you, Victoria? She smiled. But her lips didn't quite meet. I wasn't hungry, she said lightly. I sipped my tea. Watched her fingers tighten around her cup without lifting it. Funny how quickly appetite returns when you're not the one collapsing. A beat of silence stretched thin between us. She laughed brittle. Helen, you're not seriously suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, I said, setting my cup down. I'm just saying, some people don't know who they're dealing with. She stared at me then, really looked. For the first time, I saw it. The flicker of unease. The realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd misjudged me. She thought she was playing chess with a doddering old woman. She didn't realize she'd just stepped into check. She stayed longer than I expected. That told me everything. See, guilt doesn't always run. Sometimes it lingers, hoping it can charm its way back into the room it tried to poison. Victoria sat there in my living room, legs crossed, pretending to relax. But her shoulders betrayed her. Too stiff, like a cornered animal waiting to see if the trap would snap shut. I've always admired how protective you are of your family, she said after a long sip of untouched tea. I suppose I've had to be, I replied. People don't always show you who they really are. At least, not at first. Her smile froze, then cracked. Just slightly. Is that how you see me? She asked, cocking her head. Someone not worth trusting? Now why would you ask that? I tilted my head to mirror hers. Unless you're feeling guilty about something? That did it. She blinked, slowly, sat back in her chair and exhaled through her nose like she was finally too tired to keep up the act. I see what this is, she said, voice lower now. You think I did something to John? I didn't answer. She stood, walked to my fireplace mantel, ran her fingers along the edge of a picture frame. One of John, younger, grinning in a Cubs hat. You think I wanted to hurt him? I think people don't push casseroles that hard unless they're trying to be remembered, I said simply. And that was when the slip came. She spun around, eyes flashing. He deserved it. Silence. That awful, thick silence that always comes after someone tells the truth they can't take back. She blinked again, slowly, as if she hadn't meant to say it aloud. I'm sorry, I said, so quiet I almost didn't recognize my own voice. What was that? She laughed, but it came out cracked and bitter. He stole the job, Helen, my job. 23 years ago, I was next in line for director, but he smiled, shook hands, and took it. No apology, no guilt, nothing. I said nothing. Let her talk. Do you know what that does to a person? She went on, pacing now. To build something, to climb for it, and then watch it handed to a man who never earned it? He ruined my career, my future. That night was justice. There it was. She realized too late what she'd done. Her eyes darted to me. I didn't mean, she started, but I was already standing. Oh, but you did, Victoria, and so did my little sugar bowl, tucked between the sweetener packets on the table. The recorder inside had captured every word. She didn't know about the sugar bowl. It was Richard's idea years ago, before he passed. Always keep your ears open, he used to say, tapping the ceramic lid like it held state secrets. It did now. I'd hidden the recorder inside that old sugar bowl before Victoria arrived, clicked it on with one flick of my thumb when I brought out the tea, then I just let her talk. And talk she did. I didn't interrupt, I didn't provoke. I just let her peel herself open, piece by bitter piece, until the confession poured out like the poison she'd meant for someone else. When she realized what she'd said, it was already too late. She stood frozen in my living room, eyes darting, hands twitching like she wanted to grab her words and stuff them back into her mouth. But she couldn't. The damage was done. I walked past her, calm as ever, and gently placed my hand on the lid of the sugar bowl. She didn't blink, but her chest rose in a single, sharp breath. You recorded me, she whispered. I didn't answer. Her voice grew colder, lower. That's illegal. Not in Colorado, I said. One-party consent. And last I checked, I'm very much a party. Her expression crumpled into something ugly. Not panic, not fear, but fury. The kind of fury you feel when someone smarter than you dares to win. You don't understand what he did to me, she snapped. He humiliated me, set my career back a decade. So you tried to kill him. It wasn't supposed to be him? she shouted suddenly, and there it was, the final nail. The silence that followed was worse than her yelling. Her mouth opened, closed. Her hands gripped the back of my armchair like it might anchor her. "I didn't mean to say that," she muttered. "I don't know why I said that. I think," I said slowly, "you finally told the truth." She backed toward the door. "This was a mistake." "For you, yes," I said. "A big one." She opened her mouth. "To threaten me? To beg?" I didn't give her the chance. "I think you should go now," I said calmly. She left without another word. I waited 5 minutes after the door shut. Just sat there, breathing. Then I reached into the sugar bowl, pressed stop, and slid the recorder into my purse beside the vial. Evidence, motive, confession, all in my hands. Next stop, the police. But I wasn't going to walk in alone. I wanted her to see me do it. I wanted her to know exactly who finished the game. The next morning, I put on Richard's favorite navy coat and pinned my hair back with the silver beret Sophie gave me last Christmas. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't scared, not anymore. I walked into the local precinct holding a canvas bag with 2 items, the sugar bowl recorder and the sandwich bag with the digitalis vial. The detective on duty was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense voice. "You're here to report a crime?" she asked, gesturing me to sit. "Attempted murder," I said evenly. "And I have proof." That got her attention. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from detectives Marquez and Ellis, playing back the recording as they followed along with notepads and raised eyebrows. "She says he deserved it?" Ellis repeated, rewinding the audio. "She says it wasn't supposed to be him," I replied. "My 12-year-old granddaughter nearly took a bite before I stopped her." Marquez looked up. "You believe the child was the intended target?" "I know she was," I said. "Victoria wasn't trying to settle an old score with John. She was trying to hurt me. And Sophie's the only part of me she could get to." He leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing. "That's why she watched you the whole night. She didn't care who got hurt," I said. "Just as long as I watched it happen." They took my statement, copied the recording, tested the vial. When they ran a preliminary on the casserole dish Victoria had left behind, it came back positive for foxglove residue. That was enough. By late afternoon, I stood at my front door, staring out at the street as a black sedan pulled up. Victoria was already on the porch, clearly summoned by a message from someone pretending to be me. Probably thought I'd changed my mind, that she still had time to twist things around. She knocked once. The door opened before I could touch the handle, and 2 detectives stepped forward. "Victoria Carter," Marquez said firmly, "you're under arrest for attempted murder." Her face. Oh, I'll never forget her face. First confusion, then denial, and finally, that flash of rage that always shows up when people realize they're no longer in control. "You tricked me?" she hissed, eyes darting to me over Marquez's shoulder. I just smiled, calm and steady. "No," I said softly, "you tricked yourself." And as the cuffs clicked closed behind her, I felt something settle in my chest. Not joy, not revenge. Something quieter, like justice exhaling. 3 weeks later, I received a certified envelope, thick, stamped, and heavy with consequence. Inside, formal charges filed by the district attorney. Attempted murder, administering a toxic substance, reckless endangerment of a minor, and, my personal favorite, premeditation with malice. That last one? That's the charge that makes a judge sit up straighter. Victoria Carter wasn't just arrested. She was indicted. And because she'd targeted a child, even almost, her bail was denied. The judge said she posed a, quote, credible and specific danger to the public. Her lawyer tried to argue stress, confusion, emotional instability. But the recording, the poison vial, the test results, the intent, unshakable. Her smirk didn't survive the hearing. I watched from the second row as the bailiff cuffed her again and led her out of the courtroom, her expensive scarf twisted around her wrist like it could hide the metal. Justice, dressed in courtroom beige, But that wasn't the only envelope that arrived. John, still recovering in rehab, stubborn and sore as ever, had filed a civil suit. Pain and suffering, the lawyer explained. Loss of wages, emotional distress. But John put it simpler when I visited. "She tried to kill me," he grunted, dragging a resistance band across his chest. "She can pay for the damn hospital bills," the nurse behind him muttered, "and then some. As for Sophie, my brave, sharp-eyed girl, her school principal called me personally. I've never seen a child so calm in a crisis," he said. "We'd like to recognize her publicly." The next week, Sophie stood on stage at the middle school assembly, holding a little glass trophy with her name etched in gold, for courage and composure in an emergency. When they asked her how she knew to act, she said, simply, "I listened to my grandma," and the whole room clapped. "But me?" I cried, not big, noisy tears. Just one or two, sliding down my cheek as I watched her glow with pride and purpose. She'd been seconds away from disaster. And because she trusted me, she'd walked away untouched. Victoria thought she was taking something from me that night. Instead, she handed me back the very thing I'd almost forgotten: belief in my own instincts. Later that night, I slid the commendation letter into the top drawer of my writing desk, right beside the plastic bag holding the napkin with 2 words scribbled across it: "Act sick. The night that saved my family." The night Victoria's power and poison finally turned to dust.